Carl Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't about mental illness. It was about people who see everything others miss, and why this ability often destroys them. In his clinical practice, Jung encountered individuals with what he called differentiated perception. People who could read micro-expressions, sense hidden emotions, and detect psychological patterns invisible to everyone else. These rare individuals could see through social masks, spot lies instantly, and feel the unconscious tensions in every room. But Jung didn't see this as a gift at first. He called it dangerous, the cost of seeing too much. Jung noticed that people with this extraordinary perceptual ability often ended up isolated, exhausted, and unable to maintain normal relationships. Not because they were unstable, but because their sensitivity came with a psychological cost no one else understood. To see everything meant constantly carrying more than the human mind was designed to hold. As Jung wrote later in his private notes, the danger lies not in the perception itself, but in the psychic isolation it creates. When one sees clearly what others cannot or will not see, one becomes a mirror that society cannot bear to look into. This wasn't just a clinical theory, it was born from a real case. The patient who saw too much. In 1913, during the same period when Jung was breaking from Freud and descending into his own psychological crisis, he worked with a patient who would crystallize this dangerous discovery. She was a highly introverted, intuitive type, what Jung would later categorize as the rarest of personality orientations. She could walk into a room and immediately sense the psychological atmosphere. Who was lying? Who was silently resentful? Who was concealing emotional pain behind polite gestures? Her capacity to read the unconscious was uncanny. Jung noted, the patient displays an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others, but this faculty appears to cause her considerable distress rather than advantage. Her life was unraveling precisely because of this ability. She couldn't maintain friendships. People felt exposed around her. She couldn't hold employment. Her very presence disrupted the collective, unconscious agreements that groups rely on to function smoothly. She couldn't even engage in small talk because every word felt layered with unspoken truths. Jung realized something startling. He wasn't treating pathology. He was observing what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious, when perception becomes so differentiated that it undermines social survival. Consciousness on the edge. To verify her insights, Jung carefully cross-examined her descriptions of others. Time and again, her observations proved accurate, so much so that Jung concluded she was not delusional. Instead, she was perceiving reality on a deeper level than most people could tolerate. But this raised a troubling question. If someone can see reality too clearly, is that a strength or a curse? This is where Jung began formulating the idea of participation mystique, a state in which the psychic boundaries between self and others collapse. The patient, he observed, wasn't just perceiving other people's emotions, she was absorbing them, almost as if her psychological system acted like a sponge. In his Red Book notes from the same era, Jung wrote, "There are those among us whose psychic apparatus is so finely tuned that they absorb not merely conscious communications, but the entire unconscious atmosphere of their environment." Modern psychology has partially validated this observation. Research by Dr. Elaine Aron on highly sensitive persons, HSPs, shows that around 20% of people are biologically predisposed to heightened sensitivity, processing sensory and emotional information more deeply. But Jung had noticed something even narrower, the introverted intuitive type, which he believed made up perhaps 1% of the population. These individuals don't just feel emotions more intensely. They perceive hidden patterns, unconscious motives, and repressed content with startling clarity. The shadow mirror. The danger, Jung discovered, was not the perception itself but the reaction it provoked. When such individuals reflected back the unacknowledged shadow of others, they often became scapegoats. People projected their denied qualities onto them, attacking the mirror rather than facing their own inner reality. As Jung later wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But for most, it was easier to attack the perceptive individual than to integrate uncomfortable truths. For the patient in 1913, this meant being blamed for problems she merely observed. If she pointed out that someone seemed troubled, she was accused of creating drama. If she voiced concern about obvious tensions, she was labeled negative or judgmental. Jung recognized this as a universal psychological defense. People unconsciously attack those who expose what they would rather keep hidden. Thus, the very clarity that defined her gift became the reason for her suffering. A dangerous evolutionary step. Jung began to wonder if this phenomenon represented not pathology, but an evolutionary step in human consciousness. Perhaps these rare individuals carried a form of perception that society was not yet ready to handle, a glimpse of the next stage of psychological development. But he also saw clearly, unless this perception was integrated consciously, it would destroy the individual. In the next part, we'll explore how Jung categorized different kinds of these intuitive perceivers, the distinct dangers each faced, and why he believed this discovery was one of the most perilous insights of his entire career. From case study to typology. The patient Jung encountered in 1913 was not an isolated phenomenon. As he continued his clinical work, Jung noticed other individuals who shared variations of this uncanny perceptual ability. Each case differed in expression. Some were more intellectual, some deeply emotional, some strikingly creative, but all revealed the same underlying pattern: the ability to see too much. To make sense of what he was observing, Jung turned to the framework that would later define much of his career: psychological types. Published in 1921, Psychological Types was not just a book about personality. It was his attempt to codify the very discovery that had disturbed him years earlier. For Jung, these perceptive individuals belonged primarily to the introverted intuitive type. Unlike extroverted intuitives, who projected possibilities into the outer world, becoming explorers, inventors, or entrepreneurs, the introverted intuitive lived entirely within an inner vision. They weren't simply imagining the future. They were perceiving the unconscious structure beneath present reality. The four intuitive variants. Through his study, Jung suggested that these perceptive individuals could manifest in at least four distinct ways, depending on which function dominated alongside intuition. 1. The visionary. This person perceives patterns and hidden structures, often anticipating societal or technological shifts long before they occur. Jung noted that many prophets and reformers fell into this type. Their danger was alienation. They saw futures others denied, making them targets of skepticism or hostility. 2. The mystic. This type experiences deep, symbolic impressions of people and events, often framed in religious or spiritual imagery. Mystics see not just patterns, but archetypal meaning. Their danger was dissolution. Their visions could overwhelm them, blurring the line between inner symbolism and outer reality. 3. The artist. Here, intuition channels itself through aesthetic form: painting, music, literature. Such individuals externalize unconscious truths in symbolic art. Their danger was misinterpretation. Society often dismissed their work as eccentric, failing to grasp the unconscious truths embedded within. 4. The prophet of doom. The rarest and most precarious. Jung described this type as perceiving only images of the inner object. They live almost entirely in visions of possibility and destiny, often foreseeing catastrophe or transformation. Their danger was madness. Without grounding in thought, sensation, or feeling, their visions could spiral into delusion. What unified these types was not their expression, but their fate. Each one risked psychological collapse, not because they were wrong, but because society had no framework to contain what they revealed. The three core dangers. As Jung analyzed these cases, he identified three recurring dangers that threatened such individuals. 1. Isolation from society. To see too much was to live apart. The visionary, the mystic, the artist, they were often celebrated only after death, when society was finally ready to understand what they had already perceived. In life, they endured loneliness, ridicule, or persecution. Jung emphasized that human beings are fundamentally social. Prolonged isolation leads to despair, paranoia, or withdrawal. 2. Inflation of the ego. Jung warned that those with unusual perception often mistook their insights for personal greatness. He called this state ego inflation, a dangerous identification with the archetypes they glimpsed. Instead of remaining humble servants of perception, they came to believe they were prophets, saviors, or chosen ones. History. Jung noted, is filled with such figures. Individuals who began with genuine insight but ended consumed by delusions of grandeur. 3. Psychic overload. Perhaps the most immediate danger was sheer exhaustion. The human nervous system, Jung argued, was not designed to carry the weight of so much unconscious material. His patients often reported chronic fatigue, insomnia, anxiety, and a sense of drowning in impressions. The more they perceived, the less they could filter, until perception itself became unbearable. These dangers were not merely theoretical. They appeared again and again in Jung's case notes, often with tragic results. Some patients retreated into reclusive lives. Others broke under the pressure and entered psychosis. A few found stability by channeling their perception into disciplined art, scholarship, or spirituality. But all bore the same burden. They had seen what others refused to see. Jung's own reflection. It is impossible to separate Jung's discovery from his personal life. In the years following his break with Freud, Jung himself entered what he called a confrontation with the unconscious. His visions during this period, later recorded in the Red Book, were filled with archetypal figures, mythic battles, and prophetic images of a Europe on the brink of war. In his private writings, Jung admitted that the line between genius and madness was perilously thin. To confront the unconscious is to risk dissolution of the ego, he wrote. One must have a strong vessel, lest one be swallowed entirely. In a sense, Jung was not only documenting his patient's struggles, he was documenting his own. His typology of the introverted intuitive may have been less a clinical category than an attempt to understand his own perilous gift. The social reaction. Jung also observed a fascinating pattern. When such individuals expressed their perceptions openly, they often triggered violent reactions from others. People resisted having their hidden motives exposed. Friends would distance themselves. Families would label the person unstable. Communities would scapegoat them. From a Jungian perspective, this was the shadow in action. The perceptive individual reflected unconscious material so accurately that others projected their disowned qualities back onto them. The mirror became the enemy. This social rejection was not merely painful, it was often catastrophic. Jung noted that without at least one supportive relationship, these individuals tended to collapse. He stressed that their survival depended on finding a community or at least a single confidant who could validate their experiences without fear. Living examples of the perceptive type. Jung did not confine his insights to anonymous case notes. Throughout his writings, he linked the introverted intuitive type to historical figures whose lives embodied both brilliance and tragedy. He pointed to mystics such as Meister Eckhart and Jacob Boehme, men whose visions reshaped theology but also invited accusations of heresy. Their intuitive perception grasped truths that institutional religion resisted, making them both revered and condemned. In the artistic sphere, Jung cited Friedrich Nietzsche, a man whose writings revealed uncanny psychological foresight. Nietzsche anticipated the coming crisis of meaning in modern Europe, declaring the death of God decades before the collapse of traditional faith became culturally evident. Yet his genius came at the cost of unbearable psychic tension, culminating in his mental breakdown at age 44. For Jung, Nietzsche was the archetypal warning, a man consumed by the very visions that made him prophetic. He wrote, Nietzsche's tragedy was that he gazed into the depths without the means of containing what he found there. Artists like William Blake and Vincent van Gogh also fit this pattern. Their work captured archetypal images of the collective unconscious, yet society dismissed them as eccentric or unstable until long after their deaths. Jung considered these cases evidence that perception beyond the norm is often indistinguishable from madness until time validates its insights. Survival strategies. Despite the dangers, Jung did not believe such individuals were doomed. He believed survival was possible if they learned to consciously integrate their perception. From his clinical practice and personal struggle, he identified 3 strategies. Symbolic expression. Jung urged perceptive individuals to channel their insights into symbolic form, art, myth, ritual. Expression transformed overwhelming perceptions into something shareable, protecting the psyche from overload. Jung himself practiced this through painting, writing, and building his famous tower at Bollingen, a physical symbol of inner order. Grounding in the ordinary. He advised balancing vision with practical, embodied activities. Gardening, carpentry, cooking. These ordinary acts anchored the visionary in the tangible world. Without grounding, Jung warned, the intuitive becomes like a balloon without ballast, drifting into the upper air until it bursts. Community and containment. Above all, Jung stressed the need for at least one supportive relationship. Whether a friend, mentor, or therapist, this person acted as a container, offering the validation and stability the intuitive type could not find in the larger society. Without such an anchor, they were left vulnerable to projection, scapegoating, and self-doubt. These strategies did not erase the burden of perception, but they made it survivable. A modern perspective. Today, Jung's observations resonate with several branches of psychology. Research on highly sensitive persons, HSPs, confirms that a subset of the population processes sensory and emotional information more deeply, often leading to overwhelm. Studies in social neuroscience show that some individuals have heightened sensitivity to micro-expressions and emotional contagion, echoing Jung's description of absorbing the psychic atmosphere. At the same time, modern clinicians echo Jung's warnings. Psychiatrist Ian McGilchrist, in The Master and His Emissary, notes that individuals with highly developed pattern perception risk losing contact with ordinary life, sliding into obsession or fragmentation. The boundary between creative vision and psychosis remains perilously thin. What Jung saw as archetypal truth, modern science describes in neurological terms. Yet both traditions agree. Perception beyond the ordinary carries both potential and peril. The double-edged gift. Ultimately, Jung came to view this dangerous discovery as a double-edged gift. On one hand, the introverted intuitive type embodied the next step of consciousness, a deeper integration of unconscious material into human awareness. These individuals acted as early explorers of the psyche, revealing what society would only later accept. On the other hand, their very clarity made them vulnerable. They suffered not from delusion, but from the resistance of a world unwilling to face itself. As Jung put it, the world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you. For the perceptive individual, the world often told them they were mad, when in fact, they were simply ahead of their time. A perilous responsibility. By the end of his career, Jung no longer saw these individuals as pathological. He saw them as carrying a responsibility to mediate between the unconscious and the conscious world, to translate visions into symbols others could bear. Without translation, perception remained dangerous. With it, perception could become revelation. He cautioned, however, that very few could carry this responsibility without being broken by it. The gift of perception was inseparable from its peril. Jung's discovery, then, was not merely psychological. It was existential. To see too much was to risk everything: sanity, belonging, even survival. Yet without such individuals, humanity might never glimpse the depths of its own psyche. The mirror we fear. Jung's most dangerous discovery was not a theory, it was a mirror. He found that certain rare individuals could reflect back the hidden contents of the human psyche with unsettling clarity. They did not merely imagine patterns, they perceived them. They did not invent hidden motives, they revealed them. And society recoiled. To be around such a person was to feel uncomfortably seen. The mask of persona, our carefully crafted social identity, slipped in their presence. Jung observed that people instinctively attacked these mirrors, dismissing them as unstable or projecting their own shadows onto them. It was easier to condemn the messenger than to face the message. This is why Jung considered the discovery dangerous. It exposed the fragility of collective life. Human society depends on a tacit agreement to uphold certain illusions. When those illusions are stripped away too quickly, the group reacts defensively. The perceptive individual becomes a scapegoat, not because they are wrong, but because they are right too soon. A collective blindness. Jung feared that if society ignored these individuals, it risked stagnation. For him, they were like early seismographs of the collective unconscious, sensitive instruments detecting tremors long before earthquakes erupted. Mystics, artists, visionaries, and prophets had historically played this role, often suffering personally while humanity reaped the benefit of their insights. He wrote, "The visionary is often despised in his own time, but centuries later, men build temples where once they mocked. In other words, society may only recognize the truth of these individuals when it is finally ready, long after the individual has been broken by rejection. This blindness was not accidental, it was protective. Jung believed the human psyche resists premature awareness for good reason. Consciousness grows slowly, and too much illumination at once can destabilize the individual and the collective alike. The danger was not simply in seeing. It was in seeing before others could bear to. Jung's personal reckoning. Jung himself bore the weight of this discovery. His own visions during his confrontation with the unconscious were so overwhelming that he feared madness. He often described himself as standing on a razor's edge between sanity and chaos. Unlike Nietzsche, Jung survived, largely because he found ways to contain and express his visions symbolically. The Red Book became his vessel, a place to transmute raw perception into myth and art. His later work in archetypal psychology, dream analysis, and alchemy can all be seen as extensions of this survival strategy. He had discovered the danger firsthand, and then spent his life teaching others how to endure it. The modern resonance. Today, Jung's discovery resonates more than ever. In an age of constant information, many people experience a form of perceptual overload. Social media, news cycles, and cultural upheaval expose us to unconscious material, fears, desires, shadows that were once buried. The result is strikingly similar to what Jung described: isolation, fatigue, projection, and scapegoating. Some individuals, particularly those with high sensitivity or intuitive temperament, still find themselves carrying more perception than they can bear. They may feel alienated, overwhelmed by patterns others deny, and punished for speaking truths too soon. In this sense, Jung's dangerous discovery is not confined to his era. It is a timeless human reality. The necessary balance. For Jung, the key was never to suppress perception, but to balance it. The perceptive individual must learn to translate visions into symbolic form, ground themselves in ordinary life, and seek communities that can bear their truth. Without this balance, perception collapses into destruction. With it, perception becomes a force of transformation. He insisted that the individual's task is not to save the world, but to remain whole. The true danger was not the unconscious itself, but failing to integrate it. As Jung put it, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The dangerous gift. Jung's most dangerous discovery, then, was also his most hopeful. He saw that human consciousness could expand, that some individuals were already living at the frontier of this expansion, and that their suffering pointed the way forward. But he also warned that the gift of perception is inseparable from its peril. To see too much is to walk a lonely path. It demands courage, humility, and a willingness to be misunderstood. Perhaps that is why Jung's words still resonate. They speak to those who feel the burden of perception even today, reminding them that they are not pathological, but part of a deeper movement of the psyche. They are both the warning and the promise of what humanity might become.